Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Smart Cities Chronicles, your podcast for everything smart cities action, investment, and outcomes. My name is Adam Beck. I'm host of the Chronicles. My day job is Executive Director at the Smart Cities Council for Australia and New Zealand, and delighted to bring you episode 77 of the Chronicles today. We head over to the delightful New Zealand, and joining me, I have Jen and Iain from the Waikato region and Hamilton City Council. Good morning to you both. How are you?
Morning, Adam. Really good, thanks.
Good morning. I'm great too. It's another beautiful day in paradise.
Yes. If only we could get there. That's
yeah, indeed.
That's the issue. Iain, let's start with you. Can you give us a sense of who you are and what you do?
So I'm the Professor of Environmental Planning at the University of Waikato. So I lead the planning program there. Also, a couple of visiting positions at other universities around the world. So I basically do research on how to improve our use of land and resources. Some of it's New Zealand based, but actually most of it isn't. So I tend to work more internationally around some ideas of new visions of planning. So that's a very brief sum up of what I'm interested in.
Fantastic. And Jen, tell us a little bit about your role and what you're responsible for at Hamilton City Council.
Sure thing. So I have this fabulous title. I'm the General Manager of City Growth at the Hamilton City Council. And what that means is that I have quite a broad remit that covers long-term planning for a much larger city. So we think about Hamilton in a boundaryless way. We've got really tight boundaries for a city. So we think about what Hamilton's going to look like in 50 to 100 years' time and kind of lay down the foundations for that. And then my remit kind of runs back through the land use planning, right through resource consenting and building consenting, right through to the actual the built product at the end. So I've got the full gamut of growth going on.
How long have you been there, Jen?
I've been back in Hamilton for 3 years. So I grew up here,
okay.
Then went overseas for 5 years, lived in Auckland for the last 15. So I've been in this role for about 2.5 years.
Okay, excellent. I love that title as well. And Jen, we have listeners scattered all over the world. Some may not know exactly where New Zealand is, nor where Hamilton or the Waikato is in country. Can you share sort of some geographic sort of calibration for us? And also, why do people love Hamilton?
It's a great question. So I'm not going to tell you where New Zealand is, Adam. I'm going to figure that if people haven't figured that one out, they can Google it.
That's right.
So
Hamilton, hang up
now. Yeah, indeed. Hamilton is at the top of the North Island, just south of Auckland. So it's about an hour and a half drive south of Auckland. 37 kilometres to Hobbiton. 55 kilometres to the Waitomo Caves, probably the two most well-known landmarks around the Waikato. So Hamilton's a great place. Like people love being in Hamilton because it's close to everything. So it's a 90-minute drive to half the population in New Zealand. It's literally, if you drive for 20 minutes in any direction, you're not in Hamilton anymore. You're in the broader Waikato region. So it's really close to beaches. It's close to the mountain. It's close to all sorts of rivers and mountains. And it's got close to the big city. But it's a really booming town. It's grown faster than the rest of New Zealand for a number of years and continues to do so. So it's certainly a city on the rise.
And what's the population at the moment, Jen?
About 170,000.
Yeah, okay.
And that's a good point to just pick up, because there's a lot of research coming now about, you see all these global city rankings about the best places to live in the world, but they're not really robust from a research perspective. And what we're finding from the user experience is there's a sweet spot in city size, which is from about 150,000 to about 500,000, where you get a lot of the benefits of the cluster of people, you get the amenities, but you don't get the 2 hours in traffic. And so it's just on the cusp of becoming that kind of city where it's got the sweet spot. And just the other point with regard to maps, there's actually a real interest in geography and planning sort of circles about, so often New Zealand gets left off global maps because it's just easier to cut it. And we actually got let off one of the maps that was actually on COVID, which was very appropriate because we don't want anyone to know we're this safe haven at the end of the world. And so it does get knocked off some of the maps, but some of the ideas and some of our lifestyle really make it such an attractive place to live, and our ideas are transferable beyond New Zealand.
Yeah, I've been to the city probably 3 times now, and I have to say, this is going to sound so cliche, I had the best lamb in my entire life in Hamilton. It was absolutely incredible. So Iain, picking up on your point there, this conversation we're having is around planning, around cities, and how they sort of come together, and of course, growth and how we grow our cities. I reached out to you both because an article caught my eye last month or thereabouts, and it was in the context of the New Zealand government's sort of infrastructure stimulus program in response to COVID. Shovel-ready projects, a call for sort of ideas. Hamilton decides to put up this idea of a 20-minute city. So firstly, you totally buck the trend on the idea of shovel-ready. Men and women in high-vis vests and hard hats digging holes with machinery. You put forward 20-minute city concept. So it caught my eye from that perspective. Secondly, as a past resident and worker in Portland, Oregon, in the United States, and also a no longer practicing urban planner by trade, I geek out on that stuff significantly. And in the past few years, I've had to deal with Australian cities somewhat, bludgeoning the traditional idea of what I would call the 20-minute neighborhood in terms of where it came out of its origins in Portland, and turning it into this sort of 30-minute city where you can drive everywhere in 30 minutes or get around in 30 minutes. And I felt that it really lost its true sort of, heritage and meaning. And then here's Hamilton up at Pop. So here we are on the line now. Iain, I want to start with you. Talk to me about and when I say I mean as an academic, but also sort of on behalf of the region there. What's the interpretation there of your 20-minute city concept? How does it compare with others? Talk me through the thought process behind it for you guys.
So just to go back to the start, a 20-minute vision or a 20-minute city is basically, if we define it, it's around the idea of having a lot of your needs met within a 20-minute distance from where you live. So it's essentially around linking land use with amenity, and it is actually very shovel ready, because a lot of the measures that it involves don't involve major road building, for example, which is what takes up a lot of time. So it's more shovel ready, the kind of jobs where we're actually retrofitting in the urban landscape can actually happen quite quickly. So the idea is to bring the kind of issue, the lifestyle you want to the fore of our planning decisions. So one of the problems I've had with planning, not just in New Zealand, but in other places around the world, is I don't think we have the right planning discussions. So it tends to be around numbers, so number of houses, and also about speed. How quickly can we get processes? And I think that's doing the population of those countries and those cities a great disservice, because planning's one of the means where we can actually reallocate land and resources and make decisions for the public good, for future generations of as well as us now. So we went back to the start with the 20-minute idea, which was, instead of just responding to a stimulus, it was to think about what is of value, and what is of value to the inhabitants of cities, and to think about to what extent does our laws, our regulation, enable that to happen. And that's where we had the bit of a gap. So the 20-minute idea is putting people first. It's thinking about your lifestyle and the amenities that will deliver that. And it puts infrastructure in its place. So we see all around the world at the moment, it's infrastructure-led renewal. But it's Canada, the US, Australia, the UK, very similar conversations around infrastructure. Its purpose is to kickstart the economy and to create short-term jobs. But that's not its purpose. The infrastructure is there to serve us, to provide, to enhance our daily life. And if we separate those two conversations, we're not actually representing the people who are meant to represent in our cities really well. So that's part of the thinking about a 20-minute city, is that we should do planning differently. But to do that, you need a vision. And it's not just about numbers, or it's not just about speed. It's an overall vision, and then you can align your policies, your plans, your regulation to deliver that. But to do so requires significant investment, and that's why we put it in towards the infrastructure fund. And that's why we're working in partnership with the City Council and New Zealand Transport Agency too. So,
Jen, is Iain just a mad raving academic here in terms of these ideas? How does this actually align with sort of city policy and ideas? What's your response to this? And obviously, this is a partnership that has gotten so far that you've put it up for sort of potential national sort of interest and investment. What's the city's view on this?
Look, I think that I feel like this is an idea for Hamilton, that time has come, that actually we've been kind of talking and moving in this direction in lots of different ways for quite some time. And this stimulus opportunity has given us the impetus to kind of weave all of these projects together. Because like any city, we've got all sorts of amenity projects and transport projects and urban renewal projects happening anyway. But this has really fast-tracked a more place-based and people-centric way of thinking about how our city grows. I think, as Iain mentioned earlier, we're at this beautiful time in the life of the city where we're not yet full of congestion. We don't have this real sort of pain point that we're dealing with. We have this opportunity to think about how do we create and continue to create the kind of Hamilton that's going to continue to attract the people that we need and want to continue to grow into this vibrant centre. And this idea of the 20-minute city has grown some pretty big, strong wings in the last month or so, because it feels right. It feels right as a human, and on a human level, it feels like the kind of thing I want for where I live. And from a council perspective, really, it's just about weaving together projects that we're doing anyway into a more community-based way of planning and thinking about how the city grows.
Sorry, Jen, your point there early on in your response there, you sort of referenced this idea or a concept that, the pain points aren't there yet. Is there a genuine sense and feeling, and does the modelling show that there's kind of a line at some point where the closer you're getting to it, you're sort of really fundamentally becoming a different city, and you need to sort of plan in the lead up to that? And if there is, how far are you, like as Iain said in his introduction, there's kind of this optimum size, right, of density and space and so on and so forth. Are you far from that line? Do you know? Where are you at?
Well, so where that line is probably more a question for Iain than it is for me in terms of where it is. But like from a Hamilton perspective, like having lived in Auckland, part of the reason that I left was because it was so painful to get around, and I couldn't easily get to the things that I wanted to get to on the weekend, right? And so I moved back home to Hamilton, and it's a much nicer environment. We want to retain that. The other thing I think I mentioned in my intro, Hamilton is really tight geographically. Literally the red line in terms of what's in Hamilton and what's out of Hamilton is not that far away. And so from a growth perspective, we have for a number of years our biggest growth front has been in infill or intensification. So half of all of the new homes built in Hamilton are built in established suburbs, and that is nowhere else in New Zealand is anywhere near that. So that is creating a much denser city anyway, and so it's encouraged us or enabled us really to think more about what urban regeneration looks like, and how do we use that to our advantage from a land use perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, investment as well, but also making sure that we're lining up the amenity factors and lifestyle factors that people need in their neighbourhood to enable them to live the kind of life that they want.
A good way to think about it is that Hamilton's experiencing pretty sustained growth, which is actually really good. Lots of cities would love that, but growth isn't automatically good. growth can be bad.
Mm.
It creates congestion. If you put it in the wrong place, it means people have got to travel to work. It puts extra loads on your transport systems, your bridges, and so on. And so thinking about how you grow in a sustainable way so you retain that lifestyle offering is pretty central to it. I think the other unique point about Hamilton is different from Portland, Melbourne, or these other places that have been using this concept, is that they're talking about retrofitting almost. So if you look at Auckland or any big cities, that might already be a 1 hour, 20-minute city, not a 20-minute city. You've already got, so you're trying to bring the time down. With us, we're just not too far from that now, and it's about maintaining that with our smart plan on a growth. So we're not trying to fix something that's broken, which you do in other cities. We're trying to grow in a way which maintains the lifestyle of the people who live here. And I think the other point to make, which we touched on, is that the time is it's just a brilliant communication device. When you try and talk about what is the purpose of planning, you talk about resource consents or development control, and planning is not about that at all. Planning is around the next 20, 50 years about how we use land and resources and create the lifestyle that you enjoy now. And I'd like to try and work to create a city that in 20, 30 years, they're thankful we made those decisions. And the example I always use to my students is every park you enjoy, someone fought for maybe 20, 50, 100 years ago before you're even born. And I think that's one of the things that planning can do. It can create this beneficial legacy or a bad legacy. And that's what's smart about the 20-minute city.
Can I ask a question, a little bit off topic, but I think relevant? My first trip to Hamilton was I was out at the Innovation Park, the Waikato Innovation Park, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And I was blown away by, almost like in the middle of nowhere, suddenly you come across this campus, and I mean, it's just brimming, with intelligence and innovation and people of all ages and diversity. And I was gobsmacked at the level of innovation around digital and data and technology. It seems also from a research development, academic institution perspective, really strong roots. What happened? Like how did that come about? If we were to rewind sort of 30, 40 years in Hamilton, kind of has it always been there? Did something happen? Did you give away, cheap rent or low taxes? How did Hamilton and the broader Waikato become this hotspot of innovation?
I think, I'll start with this one, Jen, and I think there's something around its makeup. So you've got a university, and you've also got one of the largest hospitals in the Southern Hemisphere is there, right. And that's a lot of. We've actually got the most sort of PhDs or higher education sort of qualifications per capita, pretty much in New Zealand. And because we've got a small size, that's the kind of clustering effect that sparks off innovation. So, I mean, that's one of the other things about the 20-minute city is by putting things in proximity to each other, you enable more interactions to happen, which enables these innovations to happen over coffee in city centres where you do meet people It's a little bit like walking into Cheers when you walk into a coffee shop in Hamilton. There's always someone you tend to know there. And so there's a really nice size that enables innovation to foster, and it does attract. It becomes a little bit self-sustaining. Regarding the clustering effect, that's one of the things that has emerged without being planned. So there's a lot of, Hamilton has basically been, like many cities in New Zealand, has been largely unplanned in the broad sense of the word, because we've just had sustained growth and we've not had to make hard choices over space. It's not like many of the places in Europe. So we just release land on the periphery and release cells and we grow. But now we're getting to the hard choice time, and that's where we need to be smart.
Jen, can we get a response from you on that one as well?
Yeah, sure. So, Innovation Park itself was a collaborative effort, and it was partly funded by an investment from council. So, I
Yeah.
think that we have in Hamilton and in the broader Waikato region really have this kind of ethos of trying things out and giving it a go. But really, really quiet and humble about it. So just up the road from my office, we have a business called Gallagher. It's the largest privately owned technology company in New Zealand. It's absolutely massive. And, they started many years ago
Mm.
building electric fences and have just kind of grown and grown and grown from there. And, the level of innovation and sort of idea generation, innovation, coming out of that place is remarkable. And they are very much looking to encourage more businesses, more of those kinds of businesses here, more scientists to Hamilton, to enable their teams to continue to think differently and find new ways and new perspectives to continue to grow their business. And there's a lot of that happening in Hamilton. I hadn't been back very long, and I went to a thing called the Kudos Awards, which is a regional science award. And the amount of times I just about fell off my chair that night at the stunning work that gets done around here. That's absolutely world leading. And who would know?
Mm.
Who would know? These people are we're very quiet about our achievements around here. And, that's why you love the place. But, we could stand to be a bit louder about it, Adam, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, my first trip was, of course, you're flying to Auckland, right? And then you hire a car and you drive down and you drive through beautiful countryside, of course, and you kind of think, well, where is this taking me? And you kind of get to Hamilton, you go, oh, okay, another little sort of city, and then you're sort of unpacking it, and it's kind of like full of this opportunity and richness. Jen, can I talk sort of economic development for a moment, and I'm going to sort of roll up a mega question just to sort of get more your thoughts and reactions. I mean,
Sure.
where this is being recorded, we still have COVID-19 alive in the world. There's certainly been some devastating effects, economic downturn in places all around the world. Can you give us a sense of how you've weathered or not, the COVID pandemic from a from a business and economic development sense, and then can you share your reflections and how that might be informing any future plans and stimulus and mix of business? How has COVID changed anything? What's the sort of recovery look like? How bad was it? Sort of some reaction to those kind of issues. Would love to hear from you.
Sure. So Hamilton's faring really well. Like, I feel like I need to reach out for something wooden.
Mm,
Um, but we're not really heavy in the tourism space. I mentioned Hobbiton and Waitomo Caves, obviously. But Hamilton doesn't have an enormous tourism economy. So we're doing okay. That said, there are absolutely businesses around here that are feeling the pain and will continue to do so. One of the things that we did during lockdown, or during the early stages of the pandemic, was set up a fortnightly briefing for our elected members on the economic situation. And so we used obviously all the national data and all of our local data in terms of what we were seeing in terms of resource consents and building consents and what have you coming through. And things were looking not as bad as we had initially thought. But one of the things that we did overlay was interviews with key people in Hamilton. The great thing about a city this size is that everybody knows everybody. So you pick up the phone to different sectors, different size businesses, and ask them a series of questions. And every single time I asked how people felt Hamilton would fare compared to the rest of New Zealand, I got a positive answer that Hamilton would fare better, because we have a diversified economy, because we have a young, very well-educated workforce, because of our geographic endowments that are not going anywhere anytime soon. And we've got some really big, strong companies in Hamilton that will enable us to continue to thrive, I guess. In terms of stimulus, we felt very strongly that this was our opportunity to cement our our strategic pathway anyway. So the things that got put up from the Hamilton and the Waikato area around government stimulus were very much aligned with programs of work that were happening anyway. This was an opportunity to fast track some of that. And the 20-minute city was no different. It's a different way of packaging up the projects that we have and thinking about how we put people and, I guess, community outcomes first. But it wasn't fundamentally different to the direction we were going anyway. Economic development. Oh, yes. One thing that we did do really early on, I had a conversation about 2 weeks into lockdown with Richard Briggs, who's the chief executive here, and Ryan Hamilton, who is our elected member, who's the chair of the Economic Development Committee. And we had this really crazy conversation about, what can we do now? How do we make this, rather than just reacting to a crisis, how do we make this a real opportunity so that in decades to come, people look back and go, wow, they did some really good stuff during that awful time. And so was born the Economic Innovation Project, which basically started off as a brains trust of not the usual suspects. So different thinkers, different people getting into a room, us having this bold conversation about, if we could fundamentally change the economy around here, what would we do? And it very quickly fell into this innovation, smart, technology-led conversation. But that really feeding into all of the other sectors that are important around here. But the primary sector really strongly underpinned by technology and innovation these days. Logistics, so just north of Innovation Park is a piece of land that is owned by Waikato Tainui, and Tainui Group Holdings are looking to build an enormous inland port. So freight and logistics fundamentally underpinned these days by robotics and innovation and technology, and all of that underpinned by education. So without an education sector that is delivering the kind of people and the kind of training that these businesses need, we can't get to where we need to get to. And happily, we have 3 really great tertiary institutions in Hamilton. So we've got all of these endowments to enable the economy to thrive for the long term.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Iain, it's interesting. We look at the screen here. You can tell the urban planners, can't you, with the bookshelves behind them? Can you? From one planner to another, I grew up and still hold dear to my heart the analog way of doing things. Integrated transport, land use planning. Where you put things. I think it's the foundation for any good city that you can love. Can you share with me where you're at? And I don't necessarily mean you personally, but sort of the planning profession, the idea of planning. Where are you at with the world of technology and data? I mean, Hamilton, the Waikato is this innovation, epicenter. However, are we just still advancing planning as a very analog process of building tables full of things that you can and you can't do when we approve developments against them? Where are you at with the sort of the digital transformation of the planning profession?
I mean, this is a slightly different perspective, but we've actually had, I think it's the opposite. I think we've actually relied too much on numbers and not enough on values. So we've had the rise of evidence-based planning, and associated with the rise in technology, we've also had the rise in litigation as the costs of development refusal or development gain have become raised. We've seen planning become a bit more lawyered up than it was maybe 20, 30 years ago. And that means you've got to defend more decisions, and things around numbers and technology and modeling are very good for defending decisions. So we've actually seen a rise in things where we look at the environmental effects or the environmental impacts, and we try and quantify that, and whether it's about noise, water, or so on. And so what that's led is to quite a defensive, litigious planning system, not just in New Zealand, but in many places around the world. And with a focus on fast-track planning, speed, numbers, it's become incredibly tip box. And so if you meet these criteria, you go ahead. But it means that some of the more value-based judgments around place creation tend to actually have fallen away than they have done. And I think that's that's one of the things about the 20-minute city, is it puts the vision back at the start. It doesn't mean it could even be just as fast as some of the more rapid procedures, because as long as you accord with a vision, there could be a presumption that this is the kind of development that we'd allow to go ahead because it's aligned with our vision for the place. And so I think the RMA, which is the New Zealand version of the planning system, is quite it's not very visionary, it's not very integrated, it doesn't have that regional economics that you get in a lot of the major conurbations, because it's never had to do that kind of decision making. And we've never had a value on vision within New Zealand planning. And that's in common with many other places. If you look at Australia, for example, you had the massive increase in density, but it was separated from discussions of amenity around the kind of lifestyle that these people are going to enjoy in these high-rise flats or high-rise apartments. So it's trying to link both together, and you do that by having a vision and by talking about the values of what the people in the community want. And so I'd like to see technology serving a vision that people want, rather than thinking about, can we defend a decision, or what does the computer say with regard to our travel time efficiencies and so
on. Jen, just about people in the community, Iain brought up that good point just then. Will you look at community engagement around this concept of the 20-minute city? How do you start having this conversation with your citizens?
I don't think you can I don't think you can go down this road and not engage those people. It is a people first strategy. They need to be engaged all of the way. So I mean, this idea from within Hamilton City Council, I mean, nobody was talking about a 20-minute city 3 months ago. So this is a really new concept for the organisation. But it has, as I said earlier, it's grown, sprouted these crazy wings, and it's becoming very much a way for us to connect all of the dots in terms of city building. And I think because of that, it will become more and more the conversation that we have with our elected members and with our community around how the city will grow. And so I think that's the journey we're on now. How do we bring how we do this stuff now? How do we bring all of that together into this new vision that is really driven by people? One thing the council has done over the last couple of years in particular is to be really focused on community engagement. We've tried lots of different types of engagement, and it's been hugely worthwhile for us in terms of gathering that intel, but actually having those belly-to-belly conversations as well. I think to Ian's point, it's all very well to ask people a survey question and get them to, on a scale of 1 to 10, how into this idea are you? But actually getting belly-to-belly with people and having that conversation just gives you a richness in terms of the feedback you're getting.
Yeah, I think the thing I'd add to that is that this is it's a partnership between the university and the city council. We can do things and ask questions without the constraint of politics. So we can provide these valuable sort of trusted advisor roles to try and introduce some of these issues into the public domain and roll them around and see what people make of them. And the idea of the 20-minute city is fundamentally, it's based on what is of value to you. So you need to have those discussions around what does it look like in this particular neighborhood, because this is not something you can pull up off a peg and apply from Portland or Melbourne and put it here. So it's very place-based, which means you need to interpret it with the public. The other point which we haven't touched on yet, which is really important to the engagement, is as part of the research bid, we've got kind of like a living laboratory where we're trying to collect data with citizens at the same time, because this is around providing evidence of change. So if we put this new infrastructure on, how has it influenced your life? If you're cycling more, how does it improve your health? So we're going to be working with partners to try and quantify and put numbers on some of the effects, whether it's local economic spending, whether it's health benefits, whether it's environmental improvements on noise or surface runoff. And also working with psychologists to look at behavioral change. How do people mode shift from one to another? What are the things that allow that to happen? And if you're working with communities as part of this live research sort of proposal over the next few years where we're actually collecting data as we change it. That's a really good way to get real citizen engagement over a long term, rather than just, here's our plan, what do you think? We then go away for 3 years and do it. So it's the way that we put this bid together makes that citizen engagement just part of how we're going to deliver it.
Iain, I sometimes feel like, planners have had a toolkit of 12 core tools within it. They're about 100 years old, and they're really not going to date at all. Is there something in here, particularly this 20-minute city concept, which technically has been around for a couple of decades? However, is there anything in particular that's exciting you? Is there something new that you're going to learn or you're going to experience from this? Or is this just, finally, after 40 years of advocating for this, we've got one, we're going to finally do one? Or is there genuinely value add, new thinking, there's going to be new grey matter going into this to sort of, some sort of output or value add, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so I mean, you're right that it does have its fingerprints on a few things in the past. I mean, you even go back to the garden city concept, you'll remember from urban planning days, and then we had a big discussion around the 80s around polycentric urban centers, which is this idea of within your big cities you have your smaller neighborhoods that are operating almost on a 20-minute basis. So in New Zealand we would have places like Ponsonby or Notting Hill in London, or these areas which are providing a lot of the amenity within a small centre. So the discussion became a little bit around that. So in some way, it's an extension of those kind of ideas. I think the real innovation is the use of time, which is different, and the fact that you're making time a real way to link to lifestyle. So if you think about the productivity you spend wasted in congestion in a car, it's giving that back, and time links to lifestyle as well. But more than anything, I think the missing link between this becoming a reality is that we don't have the evidence of the impact it will have. We can talk about these ideas and we can sense they're a good thing, but you can't impose them on communities, and B, you need to demonstrate the impact environmentally, socially, and economically. And that's the real missing link to delivery that we've always had within planning, is that we've not really got a big research agenda which actually looks at some of these effects within the context of one concept. So, and also things which data's not that transferable between international contexts. So you might, from Portland, some of the effects that it's had. You try and relate that to New Zealand political context and said, this has occurred in Portland, and you get pushback because it's not as relevant. And so there's a need to collect data in specific national contexts to win arguments in places. And that's one of the missing links too.
Jen, I'm trying not to be biased here, but the 20-minute city concept sounds like, even from just this 40-minute conversation we've been having, it's a narrative and a brand and agenda that touches every department within the city. I'm feeling that this is a real golden common thread that potentially gives the city a nice common sandbox to be in. What comes next for the city around this idea?
Well, I mean, I think we hope to find out whether we get some funding in the next few weeks.
So you're still waiting, are you?
Yeah.
Oh,
it has been it'll be 2 weeks for a very long time, so I'm not holding my breath on the 2 weeks. But that, depending on if that comes off, then we will move pretty quickly to stand this up. If it doesn't come off, we're going to be having this conversation anyway. I think that it has really sparked a sense of excitement around here and in the city as a whole. Just this idea that we're putting people and the kind of lifestyle they want and that livability right at the front of the thinking around what this place is going to look like in decades to come. The timing's perfect. We're going into our long-term plan planning around.
Mm-hmm.
So the timing's perfect for us to have the conversation with Hamiltonians about whether this is something that resonates for them and if it's something that they want us to invest their money in.
Yeah.
So that's what's next for us.
I think one thing which I'd like to add is one of the things we don't do enough around our cities is what the academics will provide these new imaginaries, what it could be. So if you go out to the public and you say, what do you want? There'll be more car parks or, but if you say, do you want this? They go, ooh, that looks good. I want that.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things we've not done well enough is to say, provide an alternative vision and give them something to get excited around rather than just a lot of planning's around negative, don't want that there, not here, I don't want those effects, what about congestion? But a positive vision of what planning could achieve is really good. So there's an
element too that just to your point earlier, that conversation about what do you value, that actually starting with that, what are the things that are of value to you in your life, and you start with that. That's the problem you solve. You don't solve whatever, how do you get to work.
Yeah, I think if it's not funded, it will be a huge missed opportunity for New Zealand. I mean, I'm completely biased because I just think it's incredibly exciting. And you just have to, same as Jen, we're waiting. If the government wants to put it into place. So, I mean, just from a broad perspective, the national GDP of New Zealand's pretty low. Sort of the debt to GDP ratio is about 20%, just under. This stimulus package is going to increase that to 50%.
Wow.
Now, that is a once in a working life opportunity.
Once in a crisis opportunity.
Yeah. And so how do we use that extra investment, which we're not going to get again until I retire? So we've got this window to do something really exciting and really different, other than just putting down infrastructure, which will create short-term jobs, to really get that transformative change. And that's what we've been arguing for. And it is challenging for government to think about, it is different from a lot of the other infrastructure packages that have gone in. And it's a test on how we're doing our bit by being innovation and to put these challenging ideas out there, and it's in the government's court now.
Yeah, it was actually a friend from New Zealand who mentioned in passing in a conversation a couple of weeks ago that I was asking him how the funding was going and were decisions made, and he did make the observation that shovel ready doesn't necessarily mean shovel worthy, and there was a great article from Mark Thomas actually who wrote about this being a once in a whatever opportunity to align this stimulus and investment with productivity review outcomes from recent years, the sustainable development goals, the rush for jobs and shovels in ground really potentially loses that opportunity to just build foundations for prosperity decade on decade, doesn't it?
I think the example I always use about infrastructure is it has a huge impact on the future lifespan. So if you think about where the A1 is, which is a major road going north from London, that was an old Roman road built in the same place. So that's a 2,000-year-old infrastructure decision that is so shaping people's lives now. So the infrastructure that we build now, it's going to live on. How often do we move roads? So this is not just infrastructure, this is lifestyle. And that's one of the changes in narrative we're trying to push.
Okay, we're at time. Final round of sort of final question here. Iain, while you're talking, I'll get you to keep going. What are you looking forward to for the remainder of 2020, just more broadly, outside of 20-minute Cities stuff?
Well, I'm teaching next week, face-to-face with students.
Wow, okay.
So that is something I didn't enjoy teaching virtually online. It just wasn't the same. You don't get the interaction. So I'm looking forward to that. We feel in an incredibly privileged position in New Zealand. Jen touched on it. The COVID impact has been minor in comparison to other countries. I mean, it's been quite uneven. You've seen big impacts on Queenstown with their tourism, but from a regional centre, we can go to bars, we can go to restaurants, and we feel very lucky. I'm looking forward to being able to visit my family in England maybe next year. That's one thing I'm looking forward to, because we've got the third, second waves. We don't know what the future holds, and it feels like the world's changed a little bit, and I'm not quite sure, how that's going to pan out. So feeling very uncertain, but just going to, hopefully, if we get this bid in, that will be my next 5 years, never mind 6 months. We'll be delivering this and trying to live up to the bill we've given it, because we've talked it up as having potential, but then the ball's in our court. We've got to back that up and deliver on it.
That's right, and not to put any more pressure, our listeners come from over 44 countries around the world, so I'm sure they'll be looking forward to hearing the outcomes. Jen, what about you? What are you looking forward to for the remainder of 2020?
Just probably seeing how much things will change. I mean, I think we've been through this really crazy time where everything had to be fundamentally different, and we're at the other side of that. And I like this idea of not rushing back to business as usual until we decide what's worth rushing back for. So I'm really excited about how much things can change and how much we can do with this opportunity. So I'm looking forward to seeing where the cards fall on that space. And outside of that, I think I'm really looking forward to exploring my own country. I mean, I think that I've lost count of the times that I've spoken to friends and colleagues who everybody was planning some trip to Japan or Canada or Vietnam or South America, and now we're going to Gisborne and to Napier and to Northland and to Westport, and there's something quite cool about that. It feels like I'm going to a barbecue with my mates every weekend. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, Jen, Iain, thanks so much for joining us on the Smart Cities Chronicles today. It's been a fantastic conversation, and wishing you the best of luck in the upcoming announcement, hopefully, of your 20-minute city sort of bid and application. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, that was Jen Baird, General Manager of City Growth at Hamilton City Council in New Zealand, and Iain White, Professor of Environmental Planning at the University of Waikato. You can subscribe to the Smart Cities Chronicles if you're not doing so already. Head to your favourite place or platform where you get your podcasts. You'll find us there. Just search for the Smart Cities Chronicles. Our website will also take you straight to all the episodes. The website is smartcitieschronicles.com. You can send us an email anytime, chronicles@anz.smartcitiescouncil.com. Thanks for joining us on another episode. My name's Adam Beck, host of the Chronicles. We look forward to bringing you another episode soon. Stay well, stay safe. Thank you.